Source the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Seeing a sluggish drive in South LA, somebody broke it down in the center divider. If you're taking the 105 eastbound, approaching the 110, stalled vehicle in the center divider, stay to the right. The 105 east at Lakewood Boulevard, Downey area, crash from earlier sitting on the right shoulder. Monrovia, that's a broken down vehicle taking up the right lane, 210 eastbound as you get towards Mountain Avenue. And a collision in Cerrito slowing us on the 91 east 91 at Norwalk Boulevard. That right lane is blocked and we're busy from at least the 605. The 105 eastbound as you approach Crenshaw Boulevard, a crash in Inglewood, Hawthorne area, onto the right side, and slow and go from at least Prairie.
Stop going it alone for recruiting and staffing. Choose a local expert. Hiring is about getting to know people, not algorithms. So let the team at Express Employment Professionals hire for you. Visit expresspros.com to find the office near you.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Lakers get a career-high 35 points off the bench from Austin Reeves to help beat Orlando by 6. Reeves made 16 of 18 free throws. He scored 13 of his points in the fourth quarter. The Clippers win by 15 at Portland, 29 points for Paul George. UCLA will play Gonzaga Thursday night in Las Vegas in the Sweet 16 of the NCAA tournament. Gonzaga advanced to the West Regional semifinals with a 3-point win over Texas Christian. Arkansas and UConn will meet up in the other West semifinal. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. This sports report was brought to you by Original Taco Pete.
It's Aaron from Original Taco Pete. Let us cater your March Madness munchies. Order with us at Original Taco Pete on Grubhub, Uber Eats, DoorDash, or stop into our Slauson and Crenshaw location. We'll feed you soon.
Hi, I'm civil rights attorney Areva Martin, host of Areva Martin in Real Time. Weekdays, 4 to 6 p.m. right here on KBLA Talk 1580. Be sure to tune in weekdays at 4:35 p.m. for your daily download on the federal bribery trial of LA City Council member Mark Ridley Thomas. The case is sure to have many twists and turns, and our program will be the show of record in the case of United States versus Mark Ridley Thomas. We have our own seasoned justice correspondent who will be checking in with us to keep you up to speed on the daily details of this high-profile legal case. Be sure to tune in to Areva Martin in Real Time weekdays at 4:35 p.m. for United States versus Mark Ridley Thomas, only on KBLA Talk 1580.
Order in the court.
I'm Tavis Smiley. You tuned in to KBLA Talk 1580, and we're glad about it. Our phone number, 1-800-920-1580, 1-800-920-1580. Let me mention right quick, tomorrow, Tuesday, the defense in the USA versus MRT case begins. So you have been following this, of course, every day. I hope you've been following it every day at 4:35. We are the only place in town where every single day you can get an update on what happened inside the courtroom. Areva Martin in Real Time, 4:35 every day. Areva is in dialogue with our justice correspondent, Dion Raymond, brilliant attorney. So the two of them every day at 4:35 are bringing you up to speed on what happened in the courtroom. As you probably know by now, tuning in every day, I hope, at 4:35. The prosecution rested on Friday. Tomorrow, court is closed today, Monday, but tomorrow, Mark Ridley Thomas, after almost 2 years now, will finally get a chance to put on his case. The defense begins tomorrow. We will see later in this week if MRT actually takes the stand. That's the question. That's what I'm curious about, what we're all watching to see whether or not he will, in fact, take the stand in this case. He has a constitutional right to not take the stand, and oftentimes in cases like these, defendants do not, in fact, take the stand. We will see tomorrow what the defense has to say tomorrow and moving forward for the rest of this week. I am certain, and keep our eye on whether or not MRT ultimately decides to take the stand in this case himself. But again, in case you've not been following it, now we're in the sweet spot, as they say. The defense finally begins putting on their evidence in this high-profile case tomorrow. Once again, every day, 4:35 p.m. Make sure you tune in to Areva Martin in real time for your daily download on the case of USA v. MRT. In this hour, did the pharmaceutical industry intentionally target white consumers and doctors to prescribe pain medication while framing whites as being at low risk for addiction? Dr. Helena Hansen joins us in this hour to discuss the book, Whiteout: How Racial Capitalism Changed the Color of Opioids in America. I am delighted to have Dr. Hansen on for the hour. Dr. Hansen, how are you today?
Hi, thank you. I'm doing well. How about you?
If I complained, I'd be an ingrate. I am delighted to have you on for the hour. There's a lot in this book. There's a lot to talk about, and thank you for the research, and thank you for the writing, and thank you for the opportunity to interrogate you about the text. Let me start with this to make sure we're on the same page.
Thank you for having me.
My great honor. Thank you. Let me start with this so we're on the same page about this. When you say racial capitalism and how it changed the color of opioids in America, that phrase, racial capitalism, what do you mean by that exactly? So we're on the same page, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So racial capitalism is it's a term that was coined in the 80s by Cedric Robinson. He was a Black American political theorist, and he was really going back a century to W.E.B. Du Bois and C.L.R. James, who wrote about the fact that the very basis of the American economy is racial capitalism. You know, it's a story that we all know well, that profits from the founding of this country have been extracted from the bodies, the labor of Africans, but also, you know, extracted land from Native Americans. And the racial hierarchy that enabled all of that was the foundation for the, the Industrial Revolution and the immense accumulation of capital in our country. What we write about in the book is the next phase of racial capitalism, which has to do not only with extraction of labor and land, that story continues, but a story that we carefully uncovered through research that spanned a decade of biotech and pharma. And, you know, that is an enormous segment of our economy. So biotech, pharma, healthcare industries combined make up the single largest driver of our economy, the single largest sector. We spend almost 20% of our gross domestic product on healthcare and biotech and pharma. So it's a big, big economic engine. And what we uncovered was it's not only the black and brown bodies upon which capital extraction rests, but it's also the way that white consumer markets are segmented and targeted with newly patented consumable products, especially new healthcare devices and medications that companies spend a lot of money marketing, and they have a very short window of several years after the patent that they hold on the product. The years in which the patent that they hold on a given new product gives them exclusive rights to market the product. They are actively targeting white and usually insured, better off healthcare consumers with those products. So what most stories of the quote-unquote opioid crisis of the last couple of decades omit is the way that the whiteness of the imagined consumer was explicitly defined, targeted, used by the pharma companies that came up with OxyContin and sister products in the mid-'90s to get around regulatory regulation, regulatory constraints on their marketing. That they sold the image of the quote-unquote trustworthy coded language for white patient through marketing materials that showed innocent-looking white consumers. Prescribers had long been shown, meaning doctors and some nurse practitioners that are licensed to prescribe medications, they'd long been shown to preferentially prescribe pain medication to white patients and to avoid prescribing opioids and other narcotics for pain to black and brown patients, even when the condition in question, like fractured long bones, really painful fractures are in question. And, for the past century, medical schools have even taught that black patients are less likely to experience pain.
Sure.
It's been the foundation for a lot of experimentation that's happened over the past couple of centuries on black patients. So there's a whole history to how we came to the opioid moment of the mid-'90s, in which the innocent white patient enabled the companies to get around regulation and also were the primary target for the new drugs.
All right.
They also led everyone.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Finish your last point. They've also finish that last point. I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's also that beyond the regulation, they actually created the conditions knowingly, these pharmaceutical companies, for a whole secondary market, right? And then the response to the overdose and the secondary non-medical market was a medicalized response. It wasn't the typical prohibitionist, harsh, punitive drug policy that prior overdose epidemics have triggered. And so I think you're about to ask me a follow-up question. I can expand on that.
Well, trust me, I got a whole bunch of follow-ups. I got an hour to do this, so I'm not going to ask you one follow-up. I got a whole bunch of follow-ups to ask you. I didn't want to interrupt because I wanted you to lay the foundation. I think the audience gets it now. They get what this book is about. It's called Whiteout: How Racial Capitalism Changed the Color of Opioids in America. Now that we're on the same page about racial capitalism and the impact and effect it had on changing the color of opioids in America, now we got a foundation laid. We can jump from here. And again, I've got more than one follow-up. I've got a litany of them, and we're going to make the most of this hour with Dr. Helena Hansen when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about. Good thing we've got 3 hours. More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward. KBLA Talk 1580 welcomes the U.S. premiere of the Bob Marley One Love Experience. Open now through April 23rd at Ovation in Hollywood. Enter to win a pair of VIP tickets on the KBLA app or KBLA1580.com. A One Love Experience poster, vinyl record, and souvenir. This has been a community call to action brought to you by KBLA Talk 1580.
Let the law office of Jay Blacknell take the worry and stress out of your case. We support the right to a fair trial for Los Angeles Council member Mark Willie Thomas. If you are facing a criminal or civil rights matter, please give us a call, 310-469-9117.
King C. Gillette is the modern man's answer to their facial hair. With a complete set of precision tools, the King C. Gillette line offers the perfect fit for your facial hairstyle. Want to try something great? Try the Style Master, the quintessential styling tool that every man needs to craft their style. It's a waterproof, cordless trimmer with a long-lasting 4-directional blade. It's extremely versatile and designed to edge, trim, and stubble in 4 directions on any hair length. Master your style with King C. Gillette.
Chase loves soccer.
I'm Chase Carrera, and I'm 12 years old.
And his dream is to turn pro. That's why Chase and his family make sure he's always having fun and squeezing out his best with Go-Go Squeeze.
Okay, buddy, let's break for a Go-Go Squeeze.
Go-Go Squeeze Fruit on the Go pouches are a nutritious snack made from 100% fruit with no sugar added.
That's my boy!
Because when you nurture your kids, you squeeze out the best in them. Squeeze out the best with Go-Go Squeeze. Not a low-calorie food. Products range from 11 to 13 grams of sugar and 60 to 70 calories per serving.
Gain presents a tale of longing and long-lasting scent. Dear love of my life, we were on the 12B bus when I caught a whiff. A scent so fresh, so life-changing, I had to find its source. I didn't know if you were the woman in the pink freshly washed cardigan or the retired mailman next to me, but I knew one of you was my soulmate. Ah, the scent of Gain Flings. Add Gain scent beads for an even longer lasting scent.
Let's unpack a little bit more with Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues right now.
Dr. Helena Hansen is one of the authors of the new book, Whiteout, How Racial Capitalism Changed the Color of Opioids in America. Now, to the follow-ups. Let me start with this. And I'm not naive in asking this, but I want to get your take on this. You mentioned earlier that biotech and pharma are the single largest sector in our society. Indeed, they are. They drive a great deal of revenue generation in this country. Let me just start with the basics. How did biotech and pharma become such big business in America? How'd that happen?
Oh, well, that's a great and very large question. I want to hone in on the racial capitalist part of it.
Sure.
Because I began to outline before how academic medicine as a whole, which has been historically the place where a lot of the new biotech and pharmaceuticals are developed, really rests on a system of not only racial capitalism, but racial experimentation and racialized access to health care. So it's no mistake that most of the medical schools across the country, most of our medical schools across the country are located in poor Black and brown neighborhoods. That's not an accident. They needed to have access to populations that they could experiment on. You know, that, and we've seen that story in so many different ways. But I want to highlight that to this day, academic medical schools and the research that happens there really rests on access to these populations, first to test new drugs and devices, and in exchange for that, also offering certain kinds of access to low-cost health care that these populations don't otherwise have. So the fact that we don't have universal health care, we don't have a health care system that reaches Black and brown communities, that they've been explicitly excluded from a very privatized, profit-based health care system in this country, it enables the very system of experimentation testing that we have that then develops products that are only affordable to affluent white markets. In the case of opioids, it was not only affluent white markets, but it was also rural and mining communities of white people who were insured with certain kinds of workers' compensation insurance and who went to doctors regularly for pain-related complaints. So that was one other population of white consumers that the opioid companies targeted from the beginning. But the idea is that the opioid moment of the mid-'90s when the manufacturers like Purdue Pharma got FDA approval to market a new type of opioid embedded in a slow-release capsule as a minimally addictive pain reliever for moderate pain like lower back pain. This was a revolution in opioid marketing, with opioids before that having been restricted to very severe post-surgical pain or cancer pain. You know, they were able to open an enormous market because they were able to get approval to go directly to primary care doctors in largely white communities, both affluent suburban white communities and the mining and rural towns where I just mentioned there's a population of people with workers' comp insurance that would pay for these expensive new products. So they're building on a whole century plus of racialized experimentation, pharma and biotech development that then pivots and sells very high-cost products to well-insured white patients within a healthcare system that's stratified that way.
Let me cut in here because you've said something here now, Dr. Hansen, that I had never processed, and I sometimes I get shocked at things I hear on this program because it seems so obvious, and yet I never processed it in that way. I've traveled all across this country over the course of my career. And you're absolutely right. And I never really thought about it in that way. I never thought about the location of these medical schools and the proximity of these medical schools to a community that they want to test and to try things out on. And then when they figure out what works and what doesn't work, then they raise the price of these medicines and sell them to affluent white folk who can afford them, hence an opioid epidemic. But I had never, ever thought about the specific location of most medical schools in this country. That's arresting for me.
Yeah, and one thing I want to do is just situate your question, which was spot on, about how our pharma and biotech industries got to be so large, and the healthcare industries in general got to be so large in this country. When it comes to opioids, we are less than 5% of the world's population in the U.S. We consume over 80% of the world's opioids. So that, for one, puts things in perspective.
Wow.
But the other thing is that we spend the most per capita in this country on healthcare of any country in the entire world. And, of course, that's unevenly spent. That's spent by, the well-insured, largely white segment of our population. But we spend the most per capita. We get the worst health outcomes of any industrialized nation. So when you compare the U.S. to our 17 peer countries around the world, we come out at the bottom in terms of health outcomes. And a lot of that rests on the very racialized, for-profit, and privatized healthcare system that we have. Yeah. Every other country has some form of universal healthcare or government-supported healthcare that expands access. We don't have that, and what it does is it leaves Black and brown low-income communities vulnerable to not only lack of access, but when we get access, it's really through research studies, it's through medical schools, where we then also have to pay for those services with participation in studies with their bodies.
Let me interrogate the marketing strategy. Now that I'm starting to get my balance back. I was struck by that point about the location of these medical schools and their proximity to people of color, as sort of a lab rats, if you will. That's my phrase, not yours. But this marketing strategy fascinates me as well, because I am curious to learn more about the ways in which biotech and pharma decide which communities they are going to market certain products to. You talked earlier about preferential prescription. We'll get to that in a second here. But tell me a bit more about the ways in which the industry, biotech, big pharma, know exactly what they intend to do, and they will market a particular product to a particular community. Tell me about their marketing strategies.
Yeah, so what I learned in a follow-up study to my opioid study is that the opioids, the OxyContins and sister products of the 90s, fell into a pattern that applies to most, but not all, new pharmaceuticals. And that is that the companies know very well who the consumers are, who within our very racially stratified and capitalist healthcare system can afford the new products that are under patent. And so the most common segment is going to be well-insured white populations. That is the most common initial target for a new product. As that product has been on the market for 5-10 years, whatever the life of the patent exclusivity is that the company holds on it before it can go generic and competing companies can manufacture. As the life of that patent starts to expire, then they start to diversify. They look for new areas where they can market their drug. Often that involves going to publicly insured populations. Those people are lower income. They're more likely to be Black and brown patients. So their marketing strategy pivots. And the place where I left off just before our break was in talking about the follow-up to the opioid crisis that was so obviously unfolding by the late 1990s after the deregulation and aggressive marketing of OxyContin and sister products. So if you go to the congressional record, there was a debate going on about what to do about the suburban, quote-unquote, suburban youth opioid crisis.
Sure.
And that was coded language for white populations. And they ended up legalizing another opioid, buprenorphine, for long-term maintenance treatment of people who are opioid addicted. Buprenorphine is otherwise known as Suboxone. This was a huge shift in drug policy. If you just think 10 years before that to crack cocaine, there's no mention of medical treatment for people with crack cocaine dependence. That was not a part of the conversation. It was all about cracking down. It was all about policing and incarceration and sentencing. And if you look 20 years before that, the heroin crisis, quote unquote, of the inner cities in the United States, it was being blamed. The heroin crisis was being blamed for starting the race riots across the country as, unemployed Black and brown youth rose up. And so it was an epidemic of crime. It was not a medical public health epidemic requiring treatment. The closest that the heroin crisis of the 60s to early 70s came to being medicalized was methadone. And so methadone itself, because it was rolled out under President Nixon as his primary weapon in his war on drugs, was associated with black and brown people. It was a pharmaceutical, but it was restricted directly by the DEA. It required daily observed dosing in clinic by a nurse. It was extremely restricted to the point where it was semi-criminalized. Methadone clinics to this day are generally not located within the parent hospital or clinic. They're usually located far off-site in low-income neighborhoods that haven't rallied to get them shut out of the neighborhood. Even in trailers, methadone clinics are often located in trailers. So it's a racialized kind of response to opioid dependence. And by the time that the suburban opioid crisis was being debated by Congress in the late 90s, you can look at the congressional record and read that they're saying methadone is inappropriate for the suburban youth. We need a new system. So what they did was they legalized, after 80 years of prohibition on doctors prescribing opioids to people addicted to opioids, in private offices, they legalized private office treatment of opioid addiction with buprenorphine/Suboxone. The clientele was a white, affluent, well-insured clientele. From the moment it was legalized and FDA approved, the data bore it out that 91%, 2 years after approval, 91% of buprenorphine patients, Suboxone patients, were white. Over half of them college educated. Over half of them employed at baseline when they came in for treatment. And then 2 decades later, as of 2019, white Americans with opioid use disorder, 3 to 4 times as black Americans with opioid use disorder, to be prescribed Suboxone as opposed to having any other kind of response. So it's a very clear pattern in terms of who was marketed to and what the response was in drug policy.
Nope, I hear your point loud and clear about that secondary market that they created. It makes perfect sense. I'm watching my clock here. I've got 2 minutes before news, traffic, and sports. Let me tee this up. We can start it now. We'll continue on the other side. But I'm curious to learn more about this time period, this very certain time period where company X, Y, or Z has an exclusive on the patent that they have, but at a certain point, it's going to be opened up for generic production of the medication, whatever it might be. So there's a particular goal they have in that short window where only they can push this product out. Marketing-wise, what is their goal?
Oh, in that beginning time period.
In that time period, yes.
And so up until the end, their goal is to sell as much of the product as at a high price as possible.
Exactly.
Right? And the way that racial capitalism comes into this is that we then can predict who the consumer is. And that's based upon layer of racial capitalism in our system. I mentioned the fact that we are the only industrialized nation that has the level of profit-drivenness of our healthcare system, the fact that I don't know how many hundreds of millions of uninsured we're up to now. And because of our very profit-driven system and the foundation of our economy being racial hierarchy, we know who is uninsured. We know who doesn't have access to the new medications and the new technologies. So it's a natural, but it gets more interesting and complicated because as that patent runs out, the company needs to open up new markets, and that's when they start going for volume rather than the price on each unit.
Hold that thought. We're going to come to the volume part. So they got a short window of time. They got to sell this stuff as fast as they can. They target a particular audience. They market to that audience. They make all the money they can. And then when the patent runs out and now they're open to generic competition, they pivot and they start targeting other people. And now it's about volume. We're talking in this hour with Dr. Helena Hansen about how whiteness drove the opioid crisis. We talk about it, have talked about it on this program and beyond, about the impact that the opioid crisis had on white folk. This is a different argument. We're talking now about how whiteness drove the opioid crisis. The book is called Whiteout: How Racial Capitalism Changed the Color of Opioids in America. More with our guest, Dr. Helena Hansen, when we come forward after news, traffic, and sports. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
We may be LA's newest talk station, but when you're punching above your weight, it's not about whether you can throw a punch. Can you take a punch? We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. And we don't black down.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey says he is filing another separate petition tomorrow to have St. Louis Circuit Court Attorney Kim Gardner removed from office. Bailey says he's amending his original petition and filing a new one so the names of more witnesses and more evidence can be submitted in order to send the case to trial in June. Kim Gardner, who is African American, says the Attorney General's actions are politically motivated and she has refused to resign. The Indiana State Museum has launched the Influencing Lincoln, the Pursuit of Black Freedom exhibit. The new attraction to the museum explores how the black community fought for freedom and equal rights during and after the Civil War in the 1860s, both nationally and in the state. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Seeing a sluggish drive in South LA, somebody broke it down in the center divider. If you're taking the 105 eastbound, approaching the 110, stalled vehicle in the center divider, stay to the right. The 105 east at Lakewood Boulevard, Downey area, crash from earlier sitting on the right shoulder. Monrovia, that's a broken down vehicle taking up the right lane, 210 eastbound as you get towards Mountain Avenue. And a collision in Cerrito slowing us on the 91 east 91 at Norwalk Boulevard. That right lane is blocked. We're busy from at least the 605. The 105 eastbound as you approach Crenshaw Boulevard, a crash in Inglewood, Hawthorne area, onto the right side, and slow and go from at least Prairie.
Stop going it alone for recruiting and staffing. Choose a local expert. Hiring is about getting to know people, not algorithms. So let the team at Express Employment Professionals hire for you. Visit expresspros.com to find the office near you.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Lakers get a career-high 35 points off the bench from Austin Reeves to help beat Orlando by 6. Reeves made 16 of 18 free throws. He scored 13 of his points in the fourth quarter. The Clippers win by 15 at Portland, 29 points for Paul George. UCLA will play Gonzaga Thursday night in Las Vegas in the Sweet 16 of the NCAA tournament. Gonzaga advanced to the West Regional semifinals with a 3-point win over Texas Christian. Arkansas and UConn will meet up in the other West semifinal. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. This sports report was brought to you by Original Taco Pete.
It's Aaron from Original Taco Pete. Let us cater your March Madness munchies. Order with us at Original Taco Pete on Grubhub, Uber Eats, DoorDash, or stop into our Slauson and Crenshaw location. We'll feed you soon.
Congratulations to Revolution Company for being this week's winner of KBLA's Office of the Week. Log on to KBLA1580.com to enter your office to win lunch for 10, delivered by John O'Groats Family Restaurant.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a whole lot to talk about.
Hi, Maisha Cairo here, KBLA, live at Chase Bank on Crenshaw and Vernon for the In This Together tour with female business owners, a day of empowerment, community panels, and best of all, tips on building business from marketing to capital. Today I spoke with Tatiana, a community manager for JP Morgan Chase.
Thank you so much. Yes, my name is Tatiana Roberts. I am a community manager for JP Morgan Chase. I have to honestly say that this has been the most fulfilling position that I've ever had, where I get to give back to the community because I saw my mom's struggles. That's really what fuels what I do to make sure that the community has all the access to the resources that my mother didn't have.
So for the mother who's in business, what are 3 quick tips you can give to ensure that they're on the right path to accessing financial support from a bank like Chase?
Say number 1, just make sure that you're checking your credit on a consistent basis and taking action to either fix your credit, maintain your credit, or rebuild your credit. The second thing would be budget. I know that B word is kind of like ugly right? A lot of people don't like that B word, but it has to be done. We need to tell our money where to go. The last thing is to build a network of supporters that are going to lift you up.
The community building here in Crenshaw is that network. So visit the Chase Community Center on Crenshaw and Vernon. Meet a banker today. Tell them about your business. I'm Maisha Cairo in the community for KBLA with JP Morgan Chase.
Before new Cascade Platinum Plus, I would pre-rinse all my dishes because my old detergent just wouldn't get them clean. But now, I do dishes differently. A no pre-wash, no rewash, money-back guaranteed kind of different. Because Cascade Platinum Plus has double the grease fighting power of Dawn built right in, with twice the scrubbing power, giving me a clean that lets me break all the dish rules. I just scrape, load, and I'm done. Yep. So clean. With Cascade Platinum Plus, I dare to dish differently.
Heard any other talk radio lately that sounds anything like this? We didn't think so. You're listening to Unapologetically Progressive, KBLA Talk 1580.
Our guest in this hour is Dr. Helena Hansen. I'm Tavis Smiley, continuing our conversation on KBLA Talk 1580 about her book, of which she's one of the authors, Whiteout, How Racial Capitalism Changed the Color of Opioids in America. Before news, traffic, and sports, I'd ask her about this period of time where these biotech firms, big pharma, have a patent on a particular medication, particular product, and what their end and aim is during the time frame where they have this patent alone. At a certain point, the rules of the game change, and they are open to competition from those who are producing generic versions of whatever drug they have patented. So they have a particular goal in mind in those number of years to sell as much as they can to a particular audience. And then they sort of pivot. And Dr. Hansen, you were telling me about what happens when they pivot.
Oh, yes. I was talking about the pivot to publicly insured people and to a bigger market
volume,
with a lower price range. Yeah, volume. What I want to highlight, though, is that when it comes to opioids and narcotics over the past couple of decades, we've seen a mirroring of that in non-medical, illegal, for lack of a better word, markets. So when Purdue Pharma and the other companies that came in to cash in on the new generation of opioids and slow-release capsules like OxyContin, when they saw that the regulations were changing, policy was changing, and they were no longer going to be able to sell their patented products in the same way and as aggressively because they were linked to overdose, they first of all, they pivoted to tamper-resistant formulations and other formulations to try to get ahead, and part of that was putting out the image that these tamper-resistant formulations were going to keep them ahead of the urban, quote-unquote, non-white street markets that were the feared spillover markets. And it was clearly a move also to bring safer products to the white consumers that they originally targeted and that they conveyed to the regulators and to Congress were their clientele. These were trustworthy patients who weren't intentionally misusing opioids. So that was their first move. And then on the other hand, public policymakers, rather than clamping down and increasing surveillance, arrests, and sentencing of people who are using as well as selling non-medically this new generation of opioids, what they did, because that kind of response was not going to be politically supported by white voters, that kind of criminalizing response that had been the go-to for populations in the past that had been black and brown, they developed this whole new medical tier of response, and that centered around yet another marketable pharmaceutical.
So in what ways then do you indict the body politic for aiding and abetting this opioid crisis in white?
So I think the bottom line that I give to audiences, including white audiences, is that racial capitalism is the foundation for the harms that basically every racial group in the United States has sustained from this. And this is where, including white people. So, the bottom line is that racial capitalism also harms white people. That's what's so unique about this story, but it actually, if you look closely, plays out in other arenas. What I was going to say, though, about the public policy response is that not only did we as a nation create this separate medicalized tier of treatment for people who had the resources to get it and who were being targeted by the manufacturers, so treatment by private doctors with Suboxone, otherwise known as buprenorphine, for that segment of the population. I mentioned the statistics with white people 3 to 4 times as likely as black people who have opioid use disorder to get offered buprenorphine, and with black and brown people being continuing to be incarcerated at high rates based on drug policies. Not only did that happen, but what went along with that too was a shift so that prescribers were also targeted for surveillance. There was a replacement of the first generation of these slow-release opioid capsules with tamper-resistant formulations, and at the same time, prescription drug monitoring programs that surveilled doctors and pharmacists and actually left them vulnerable to loss of license and prosecution if they didn't check databases to see that their patients weren't getting prescriptions elsewhere. Those were the kinds of responses that were enacted. What that did was it cut down on the supplies of the pharmaceutical-grade opioids that had been flooding the markets in white communities because of the deregulation of OxyContin and sister products. So those streams of prescription opioids were shut down, and the secondary markets, non-medical use by people to whom maybe it wasn't prescribed. Sure. There were huge populations of people who are now opioid dependent. The prescribing rate was 10 times within 5 years. It was 10 times opioid prescribing the rate that it was before this marketing happened. But when the supplies of these prescription opioids were clamped down because of prescription drug monitoring programs, tamper-resistant formulations, then heroin markets were opened up in these areas because heroin cartels clearly saw the opportunity in it. So that was the second wave of the opioid crisis, followed by the third wave of the opioid crisis, which was fentanyl, a much more compact. It's 100 times as potent as heroin. It's much easier to smuggle. You only need 100th the volume of fentanyl as heroin. And we're talking now about not only major port cities like New York or LA where it's easy to get bulky heroin in, but we're talking about small town, Rust Belt, America, all over the country, fentanyl. And then now followed by polysubstance with stimulants causing overdose as well. Yeah. So I can tell the racial story of that, but let me let you ask your question.
Thank you. Let me get back to these prescribers. We've talked for the most part in this conversation about the ways that Big Pharma targeted a particular section of our population, obviously white people. But it wasn't just consumers. They were targeting prescribers as well. They were targeting doctors as well. Tell me about that part of the story.
Okay, so I think we touched on that before the break, which is American doctors who are largely white, due to our segregated medical education system, have long been shown to, number one, believe that black and brown patients are less susceptible to pain, and also believe that black and brown patients are much more likely to divert narcotics like opioids. So they're much less likely to prescribe narcotics, and particularly opioids, to black and brown patients, even when those patients present with very obvious painful conditions like long bone fracture. And there's a whole history to that with medical schools, as I mentioned, having taught earlier in the century that black and brown people are less susceptible to pain. And by the way, that was a good justification for all the experimentation that happened on black and brown populations at medical schools across the country, a century and more before. So that was a belief system that not only was ingrained in medical education earlier in the century, but continues into this new millennium, despite the fact that medical schools don't formally teach that anymore. As recently as a few years ago, physicians who are surveyed about perceptions of pain have said that a significant number have said that they don't believe black and brown patients are as sensitive to pain. So those things together, the pharmaceutical companies knew that was the belief system of prescribers. They also knew that the public at large had that kind of belief system, that black and brown patients are more likely to divert.
Let me ask you about something else you raised that we didn't get a chance to unpack, but I want to ask you right quick. And that is about this notion of preferential prescription. And I'm not talking just about on opioids. That's what we're talking about mostly. This are opioids. But this notion of preferential prescription in this country. Talk about that, please.
So, I think if you look at other kinds of pharmaceuticals, it's very clear that the higher risk medications that have certain other kinds of side effects that might be desirable in black and brown patients are overprescribed there. And then other new patented products that have advantages that the ones that black and brown patients have access to aren't targeting them. So, for example, I'll give you an example. I'm a psychiatrist, and another study that I have done is of the use of second-generation antipsychotics by race and class. So it turns out that there are certain kinds of antipsychotics that are used for both schizophrenia and psychotic disorders and mood disorders like bipolar that cause many fewer side effects and are much less sedating. There's a new generation of second-generation antipsychotics. The newer ones, the newly patent ones, the expensive ones, they don't cause the weight gain.
Right.
They don't cause the oversedation. Because they don't cause weight gain, they also don't cause diabetes at the same rates as the older ones, the older antipsychotics. And when you look at who is getting which medication, there's a clear pattern whereby black and brown patients are getting the older generation antipsychotics. Based on my studies of how these decisions are made on the wards, there's a lot more to it than simply the fact that the older generation antipsychotics are cheaper, maybe easier for the public insurance to get public insurance to cover. There's also an aspect of when patients show up on the wards with a psychiatric condition, the black and brown patients, overwhelmingly, the focus is on sedating them, keeping them calm. The perception is that they're violent and dangerous, despite the risks of diabetes from these medications. And then when white patients come in with these conditions, the emphasis is on keeping them free of diabetes, weight gain, these other side effects. And they're not seen as dangerous in the same way. And this also plays out with ADHD and behavioral disruption. So it turns out that these antipsychotics that are very sedating are overused in black and brown school children, much more frequently used there, and that stimulants that are really the first-line treatment for attention deficit disorder, and that also they not only do they not sedate the student, but they improve the student's educational performance. That's disproportionately prescribed to white children.
Sadly, none of this I find surprising, but it is. It's always not surprising, but shocking to hear. Not surprised by it, but shocked by it nonetheless. Even though we know that these disproportionate realities exist as a part of our life in this country. More with Dr. Hanson when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Be sure to like and follow Tavis Smiley at The Real Tavis Smiley and get Twitter updates at Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues when we come forward.
Women's History Month continues as we honor the Black women who have made a way for us throughout history. Maisha Cairo here with your K-Black Minute News, brought to you by Lendistry. Civil rights activist and broadcasting executive Zernona Clayton has been honored in Atlanta for all her astounding efforts within the civil rights movement over the years. On International Women's Day, she was honored with an 8-foot statue by sculptor Ed White in downtown Atlanta. Some of her contributions to the movement include being instrumental in the desegregation of Atlanta's hospitals, going undercover to investigate employment discrimination, organizing events for the SCLC at the time of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and more. I'm Maisha Cairo, and that's your K-Black Minute News.
Thanks to our new sponsor, Lendistry. Lendistry is a national Black-led small business lender that is headquartered in Los Angeles. Lendistry helps small business owners access the affordable capital needed to grow. Visit Lendistry, LENDISTRY.com/KBLA today.
California is a great place to live and work, but those aren't easy things to do for students also going to college. That's why the state created the Californians for All College Corps, a way for students to build skills and help others while earning up to $10,000 for school. Commit to serve your community and we'll help you pay for college. Spots will fill up fast, so learn more and apply today at www.cacollegecorps.com. That's www.cacollegecorps.com. California is a great place to live and work, but those aren't easy things to do for students also going to college. That's why the state created the Californians for All College Corps, a way for students to build skills and help others while earning up to $10,000 for school. Commit to serve your community and we'll help you pay for college. Spots will fill up fast, so learn more and apply today at www.cacollegecorps.com. That's www.cacollegecorps.com.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, where hate loses and love wins.
Dr. Hanson, I'm wondering if you think there are lessons that have been learned about the ways in which this community of white fellow citizens was targeted by this opioid epidemic. Are there lessons that we have learned, or do you expect in the years to come, given the way racial capitalism works, we'll see more of this targeting, as it were?
Well, this is a dynamic that is deeply ingrained in our economic and social system.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than saying, I could predict, yes, it's going to repeat itself, it already is repeating itself in other areas. But what are the lessons learned for us? Well, I think we need to look beyond superficial solutions and really look at systemic change. What do I mean by that? So let's just start with the low-hanging fruit of the healthcare system.
Mm-hmm.
We need a healthcare system that is not profit-based. It's going to reproduce the same inequalities over and over again.
Don't hold your breath on that one.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I'm gonna quote my own mentors, Bruce Lincoln, Joe Phelan, who coined the term fundamental causes of disease. And one of their predictions was, in a system of large social inequalities like we have in the United States, if you introduce a new biotech device or pharmaceutical without addressing the social inequalities, you're going to widen rather than narrow the health outcome gaps.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what we've seen with Suboxone, buprenorphine, the medical response to opioid overdose. We've actually seen an acceleration of overdose among whites, but particularly among Black Americans and also Indigenous Americans. So where I was going with this 4 waves of opioid crisis that has led us up to the fentanyl moment, where heroin and fentanyl came in to a big market that was opened up by the pharmaceutical companies heavily marketing their opioids. What's happened is a reproduction of the very pattern with narcotics, lethal narcotics that we've seen play out over the centuries. Heroin itself was introduced in 1898 as a medication for white Victorian housewives who were morphine dependent. So it was marketed by Bayer Pharmaceuticals as a non-addictive alternative to morphine. And with just about every wave of drug crisis that has ended up being seen as a black and brown crisis, let's take cocaine, for example, which ended with crack cocaine but began with powder cocaine. Some pioneering marketers in Colombia starting in the 70s. What we see is actually not that the dangerous narcotics that are attributed to black and brown drug dealers starting there. It's actually that these products start with affluent white markets, and then over time, as the danger of those narcotics becomes publicly known and the crackdowns happen, they end up being located in black and brown low-income communities that can't that are sucked into the drug trade because of unemployment and not benefiting from the drug policy response.
I hear that.
So that's what's played out now.
No, I get that. When we come forward in our remaining moments with Dr. Hanson, I want to come right to this question, because this is what underlies all of this for me, is that the drama that we're dealing with today, and every time she says fentanyl, I think of my friend Prince, and everybody knows that that's what took Prince out of here. But the drama that we're dealing with right now with this drug crisis in America, fentanyl and heroin, et cetera, was opened up by biotech. It was opened up by big pharma. That's the rub here, right? That our healthcare industry is what opened the door up to the crisis, opened up that second, third, fourth wave of market share that we're wrestling with right now. And I want to just close by asking what she makes of that the drama today was opened up by the industry itself. Our remaining moments with Dr. Helena Hanson when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Say the quiet part out loud. KBLA Talk 1580. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 reminding you that we keep us safe. The Center for the Pacific Asian Family was founded to help address domestic violence and sexual assault in the Asian and the Pacific Islander communities. The Center for the Pacific Asian Family's mission is to build healthy and safe communities by addressing the root causes and consequences of family violence and violence against women. They are committed to meeting the specific cultural and language needs of the Asian and Pacific Islander women and their families. CPAF's vision is of an Asian and Pacific Islander community that embraces healthy relationships and works in partnership with other communities to eradicate all forms of violence. To access services, volunteer, or for more info, visit nurturingchange.org. At KBLA Talk 1580, we believe everyone deserves to be safe. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
It's getting hot in here.
KBLA Talk 1580 is apparently the talk of the town. From the LA Times to our talk radio competitors.
Hey, there was a story in the LA Times about Tavis Smiley. Now he is back with his own radio station, KBLA, black-owned and oriented towards the black audience. So, Mo, considering your knowledge of Tavis in his audience, what's your take on this?
Well, I think in a general industry sense, I think it's always good when there are more outlets, there are more talk radio, there's more voices and representation. At that point, I think talk radio had been too homogenous for too long.
Real quickly, is it going to succeed, yes or no?
I think it's going to succeed.
You think?
There's a new sheriff in town.
We're KBLA Talk 1580, and we don't black down. Conversations that matter. You're listening to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
You're listening to Dr. Helena Hansen on KBLA Talk 1580. Her book is called Whiteout, How Racial Capitalism Changed the Color of Opioids in America. I've been delighted to have learned so much from this conversation, Dr. Hansen. Let me close with this in the 2 minutes we have left, and that is what you make of the fact and how we, again, indict the industry, big tech and biotech, I should say, and big pharma, as the entities that really opened up the door to the drama we're dealing with right now with drugs in America.
Thank you for that question. So it turns out in the book, I'm not indicting pharma per se, because pharma is behaving the way that our racial capitalist system really directs it to. If you are in business to sell pharmaceuticals or healthcare devices, you're going to go for the market that you know can pay. You're going to use all of the techniques that you know are reliable within our racial capitalist system. So, for example, marketing a new narcotic as safe because the consumers are quote-unquote safe and trustworthy, white consumers. So I think it helps to, what I'm really wanting to call attention to is the racial capitalist system itself within our healthcare, within which healthcare and pharma reside. It's useful to look at an alternate reality. And I'll give an example of France. Okay, so France is a country that the promoters of buprenorphine/Suboxone as a medicalized response to opioid addiction in the U.S. really turned to over and over again, because France managed to reduce its overdose rate by 80% in the first 5 years after it legalized office-based buprenorphine, otherwise known as Suboxone. What our U.S.-based colleagues always leave out of the picture is what else is going on in France, right? France is a country with universal health care. Okay, it's universal health care. It's got a national health care system that never permitted the sale, definitely did not permit the direct-to-prescriber or consumer marketing of OxyContin and sister products, but those products were never approved in France. They weren't judged by the national body to even have any advantages, and they over the other opioids, and weren't judged as safe. So they never had that. But addiction treatment in France is located in community-based centers that offer not only universal access to health care of all kinds, but they also, and also buprenorphine, methadone, those treatments, as well as harm reduction, such as syringe exchange, also supervised injection facilities. But they offer education. They offer help with child care, with employment. They offer a lot of participation for people with a drug use history to be hired as peer workers. Yeah. So, it's a very holistic system within a country that spends twice what we spend on social safety net and on education.
Yep. I think those are the lessons that you are detailing now that our system at some point had better learn sooner than later. But I take your point. The book is called Whiteout: How Racial Capitalism Changed the Color of Opioids in America. One of the authors of that book has been our guest in this hour, Dr. Helena Hansen. Dr. Hansen, I close where I began. Thank you for the research. Thank you for the work. And thank you so much for this conversation. We learned a lot, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All the best to you. Hour 3 of Tavis Smiley. After news, traffic, and sports, you're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information